Magnus Carlsen takes on his second, Jorden van Foreest. Jorden had helped him in the World Championship match 2021, and also he is a good friend. So Jorden knows Magnus's style well, but Magnus also knows his opponent's style, and that is even more dangerous because Carlsen is world champion at psychology. Goes c4, opens with the English opening. Jorden responds with e6. It's going to be very interesting to see what opening they choose. g3, the fianchetto system in the English. d5, bishop g2. And Jorden now has many options at his disposal. Knight f6, c5. He can play any of that. But he's thinking for a bit. And maybe there is an ambitious option of pushing the pawn to d4. That's what he wants to do. Well, why is it ambitious? Because you are moving the same piece again in the opening and that wastes time. But in return, you are getting space, which is important. So c5, Jorden bolsters his pawn structure further. Carlsen tries to break it open. This is also a reversed Benoni if you look at it, where white has his pawns on c4 and d3 and is trying to open things up. One thing that Magnus definitely knows is not to fall into Jorden's preparation, because he has many new ideas up his sleeve, and I think that's the reason why he has played something offbeat here. e3, knight to f6, very logical development by Jorden. Magnus takes the pawn, c takes d4, and notice how the position has changed. Now white has a queen side majority here, and that's why Magnus wants to expand with b4. Also, later on there are no checks with bishop b4 and stuff, and Jorden rightly prevents the expansion with a5. It's like a knee-jerk reaction. White plays a3, black responds with a5. Now you pin the knight and you maybe just want to get rid of this bishop. The reason for that is that white has slightly less space, and so when you put your knight on d2, you don't want your bishop to be hemmed in on c1, and that's why Magnus is even ready to give up his bishop pair just so that there is harmony in his position. He brings his knight out on d2, and also the knight on g1 hasn't developed yet. So Magnus is waiting. Should he put it on f3, which is the most natural, but not really. He goes knight e2, and maybe his plan is that at some point the knight will come to good use on f4, or he can use his f-pawn. Until now, Jorden's play has been a picture of logic. You know, he's developed all his pieces, he's castled nicely, and he's doing really well. What does now Jorden do? e5, fantastic move. He's connected his pawns, and already one can say that white's position looks preferable here, but Magnus now chops off the knight. Why did he do that? Bishop f6. Is there a specific reason? Does he want to put his knight on e4? But then the bishop will simply drop back and push the knight away with f5. Rook e1 played by Magnus, and Jorden getting ambitious. He plays h5. He wants to push h4 and open up the king side a bit, and so Magnus says, I need to create play on the queen side. He goes c5. His idea is knight c4, knight d6, knight b6 in the air. Bishop e6 development looks fine, or just push h4, but he goes bishop e7 and he attacks the pawn on c5. Magnus simply defends it with rook c1, and Jorden now has a nice little position. Rook e8 followed by maybe bishop f8 or h4 sounds so good. But he goes a4. He fixes the queenside pawn, and look at Magnus. He's ready to give up his pawn on c5 because the e5 pawn would hang and then the bishop would be hanging on c5. But Jorden now makes a blunder. He goes bishop e6. Why is this a mistake? Well, because bishop takes c6, an unusual move, because generally white doesn't give up that bishop. B takes c6 and you take the pawn on e5. Is it worth giving up that bishop? It actually is, and Magnus takes it. Look at Jorden's time. He has 10 minutes 55 seconds, and generally you would take it back, right? Because that looks like the only move. Not really. There's another move. Bishop takes c4. The point being that after bishop b7, you have bishop b3 and then rook a5, which is a good position for black. But Jorden actually takes on c6, and now after knight e5, white has simply won a pawn. Bishop g5 played, but this is not a good move. Now even the c6 pawn is hanging, and once again comes as a shock to Jorden, because if he plays queen d7, there is knight e5. If queen c7, you can take on d4 and sacrifice an exchange here. So a brilliant move by Magnus. Queen comes out to f6. But now you can just simply play f4 and save your rook. Yes, f4 played by Magnus, and the knight on e2 proves its worth here. Beautiful play by Magnus Carlsen. Bishop b3 played, yes, unleashing an attack on the knight, but Magnus knows that if you take the knight, I am going to take your bishop. And so in that sense, this position is already completely in white's favor. Count the number of pawns: 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 for white and 5 for black. So white is already 2 pawns up. Magnus Carlsen knows that if he keeps his king safe, he should be taking this one home. Queen to d5 played, and Magnus now just defends his pawn on g5, getting ready to play his knight to f4. Rook c8, attacking the pawn on c5, and now just knight f4 makes a lot of sense. Also, the time is clearly in Magnus's favor, 8 minutes 22 seconds, and Jorden is down to 3 minutes. The knight comes to f4. If you play queen f3, I have always king h2 to defend everything. So queen d7 played, and now Magnus is going to play on the light squares. He plays rook e4, putting pressure here. Excellent move here, and also later on he can bring his queen to f2 to bear down on this pawn on d4. Also the h5 pawn would be hanging. So after rook c6, shall we get greedy and chop off a pawn on h5? Maybe Magnus taking his time in the winning position. He's 2 pawns up. He doesn't need to hurry. Queen f2, attacks d4. Jorden defends it. And now that the queen is close to the white king and everything is secure, I think it's time to chop off another pawn. This is 3 pawns up now for Magnus Carlsen. And he has completely demolished his opponent. What is very interesting to note is how that little move bishop takes c6 came as a complete surprise. bd5 played by Jorden. Well, is he giving up the 4th pawn in the position? Because now queen takes, oh, you could even take queen takes d4. Notice this line: queen d4, bishop takes e4, queen g7 mate. So that is just game over. I think Magnus is just thinking what is the best way for him to continue, and he plays rook takes d4, which is also fine. I think queen d4 would have ended the game faster, but now rook d4, and he brings his queen back. Well, 4 pawns down, that's a lot of material, and I think Magnus would be ready to give up 1 pawn or so to sort of simplify things. That's exactly what he's doing. After rook takes, queen takes, now just chop on d5. He takes with the knight, rook takes, and now maybe rook takes a4, getting back another pawn. But also rook takes d5 is fine, because queen endgames are tricky, but when you have 3 extra pawns, you don't really have to worry. Queen e4 played, and now queen to d2. The pawn is simply moving ahead. A better defense could have been queen b3, king h2, queen d3. But after queen e4, queen d2, queen f3, Magnus puts his king on h2. Jorden tries to block the pawn, but now Magnus knows he can make progress with his kingside pawns. Well, actually, if you think about it, the queenside pawns are blocked because of this pawn. So Magnus is attacking it. Now Jorden defends it with queen b5. His d pawn can start rolling, but the b2 pawn is hanging. So a little bit of care needs to be taken, and you can see Magnus is not too pleased. There is some resistance by his opponent. He's also down to 2 minutes 40 seconds. But I think it's time to use your kingside majority now, because the d pawn has really blocked the black queen. So h5, good move by Magnus, just getting ready to get a passer from the king side. And now Jorden, also defense is not so easy to make moves here. And he attacks the pawn on h5 with queen f3. Not so easy to defend it actually, but h6 seems like a good plan here, so that everything is defended. Look at this queen defending b2, defending d4, defending h6. h6 played. And now Jorden just trying to think what is the way in which he can still try to resist. Well, it's not at all easy. He gives a check. Magnus I always love how Magnus plays winning positions. He's a picture of concentration. You know, this comes from experience. This comes from the fact that you've got your hands burnt on several occasions in winning positions, and you know not to celebrate too soon. And so now d5, the d pawn is moving forward. There's the h pawn which you have to worry about. All of this being protected by this queen. Wonderful piece, by the way. Queen e4 check, and now just simply king h2. And Jordan resigns, Magnus Carlsen wins. And listen to the discussion between these two players.
Life is full of exciting events, but it is our first impressions that we remember best. Your first diploma, your first job in a big company, unforgettable emotions from the first date, the first expensive things you bought when you got your first paycheck, and your first investments with Freedom Broker. Freedom Broker. Look at your favorite brands from a new perspective.